Hello and welcome back. Have you ever looked at a map and wondered why the country on the left operates completely differently from the country on the right? They both have borders, laws, and leaders, yet the experience of living there is night and day. To understand our world, we have to understand government. Simply put, a government is the system or group of people governing an organized community. But not all systems are created equal. That is why we classify them. Classification helps us compare how power is actually distributed. We have to ask three critical questions to unlock this map. First, who holds the power? Is it one person, a rich few, or everyone? Second, where is the power located? Is it locked in a capital city or spread out across the states? And third, how do the branches interact? Do the people making the laws also enforce them? Today, we're going to answer these questions and categorize every major system on Earth. The first and most common way to categorize a government is by asking who rules. We generally break this down into three main types. First, there is autocracy, which is rule by one. In this system, a single ruler, such as a king or a dictator, holds absolute power. Second, we have oligarchy, or rule by a few. This is where a small elite group, like a military junta, controls the government. And third, there is democracy, rule by many. This is where the people themselves participate in decision-making and governance. Let's dive deeper into autocracy, starting with the oldest form, the absolute monarchy. In this system, power isn't voted on. It is inherited through royal bloodlines and passed down through generations. While this might sound like something from the Middle Ages, it still exists in the modern world. Countries like Saudi Arabia and Oman operate with absolute monarchical authority, where the ruler's word is law. Not all kings hold absolute power, however. This brings us to the constitutional monarchy. In this system, the monarch, whether a king, queen, or emperor, serves primarily as a ceremonial head of state. Their constitutional power is strictly limited. So who actually runs the country? Real governmental power lies with an elected parliament. You see this dynamic working today in the United Kingdom, Japan, and Spain, where tradition meets democracy. There is another form of autocracy that is far less traditional, the dictatorship. Unlike a monarchy, power here is often seized through force, such as a coup d'etat or a military takeover. Once in charge, the ruler exercises absolute control over the citizens' lives. We have seen devastating examples of this in history, from Nazi Germany to the modern regime in North Korea. Moving away from the rule of one, we encounter oligarchy, rule by the few. In an oligarchy, power rests with a small segment of society. This influence is usually derived from wealth, military strength, or sometimes a religious position. Sociologists have famously proposed the iron law of oligarchy, suggesting that all organizations, no matter how democratic they start, eventually become oligarchies as power naturally concentrates in the hands of a few leaders. Now we come to democracy, the rule of the many. But even this comes in two distinct flavors. First, there is direct democracy. This is where citizens vote on every law directly. It's the purest form, but it's practical only for small groups, like in ancient Athens. For the modern world, we use representative democracy. Here, citizens elect leaders to make laws on their behalf. This is necessary for large nations like the USA and India, where voting on every single issue would be impossible. You often hear the word republic paired with democracy, but what does it actually mean? A republic is defined as a state without a monarch that is governed by a charter or constitution that protects minority rights. This is a crucial distinction. In a pure democracy, the majority could vote to do whatever they want. In a republic, majority rule is limited by law to prevent mob rule and protect individual freedoms. Some governments derive their authority from a higher power. This is theocracy, or rule by religion. In a theocracy, A god or deity is recognized as the supreme ruler, with laws interpreted by religious authorities. The legal system is based directly on religious texts. We see this in countries where Sharia law is utilized, such as Iran, or in the Vatican City, where the Pope holds sovereign power. We have looked at who rules. Now, let's look at where they rule. This is classification by geographic power. There are three main ways to organize power across a territory. First, the unitary system, where power is centralized. Second, the confederal system, where power is decentralized. And third, the federal system, where power is shared between the center and the regions. Let's start with the unitary system. In this model, the central government is supreme. Regional governments exist, but they possess only the powers that are delegated to them by the center. This is actually the most common system globally. It is used in countries like France, the United Kingdom, and China. The benefit is uniform laws, but the downside is the potential to ignore local needs. On the opposite end of the spectrum is the confederal system. This is a loose alliance of independent states with a very weak central government. In this system, the states hold the primary power. Confederations are usually created for specific purposes like defense or trade. Examples include the European Union today or the historical Confederate States of America. It balances local control against the challenge of having weak unity. The middle ground is the federal system. Here, power is divided by a constitution. The national government handles big picture issues like war, currency, and treaties. Meanwhile, the state governments handle local issues like schools, police, and local laws. This system is found in countries like the USA, Canada, Australia, and Germany, balancing national unity with regional diversity. Our next method of classification looks at the relationship between the branches of government. Specifically, we look at the relationship between the legislative branch, which makes the laws, and the executive branch, which enforces them. This relationship determines how the head of government is chosen, giving us two main options: presidential or parliamentary systems. In the parliamentary system, the legislative and executive powers are fused. Voters elect the legislature, which then chooses the prime minister from within itself. The executive is part of the legislature. This means the government can fall if the prime minister loses a vote of no confidence. This system is used in nations like the UK, Canada, and India. In contrast, we have the presidential system. Here, voters separately elect the legislature and the executive president. There is a clear separation of powers with checks and balances. The president operates independently from the legislature. This makes removal much harder, usually requiring a formal impeachment process. This is the model used in the USA, Brazil, and Mexico. Sometimes we classify governments by how much control they exert over society. An authoritarian government seeks political control. They want to stay in power, but they generally leave social life relatively alone. A totalitarian government takes it a step further. It controls everything. Using propaganda, terror, and state ideology, it dominates both public and private life. A classic historical example is Stalin's Russia. What happens when there is no government at all? We call that anarchy. Anarchy is the absence of government or authority. While philosophical anarchism argues that government is harmful and unnecessary, in reality, anarchy is usually a temporary state following a collapse. We saw this in Somalia in the 1990s and early 2000s, where the collapse of the state led to chaos. When a government collapses, nations often enter a transitional phase. A provisional government might be set up to provide temporary leadership during crisis periods, such as after wars or revolutions. However, if stability isn't restored, the country risks becoming a failed state. This occurs when the government can no longer provide even basic services to its citizens. To wrap up, it is important to realize there is no perfect system. It is always a trade-off. Dictatorships are fast and efficient because one person decides, whilst democracies are slow because they value liberty and debate. The modern trend is a movement toward mixed systems. Countries are increasingly balancing various governmental approaches to find the structure that works best for their people.